Confetti. Streamer here with airplanes, bugs, flowers, cars, people, guitars. Little bits and pieces of this and that. Them, they, us, those, spiders, birds, crawfish, ducks, cities, streets, buildings, lakes, and trees. What do you think it all means? Soap opera, what? Soap opera, villains, heroes, bodywork, weird visual stuff, weird oral stuff, music, water, rocks, flying saucers, UFOs, street festivals. Confetti, 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 confetti.
Recently, I visited poet Joseph Bathanti. Joseph resides in Statesville, North Carolina, and teaches English at Mitchell Community College. I found Joseph there on a cold January afternoon in a warm, snug corner office. I recall one wall was nothing but books. I interviewed Joseph to find out more about his background and how he writes, and I even listened intently to his poetry. For the next 2 shows of Confetti, we'll be listening to and talking to Joseph about him and his poetry. So I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy Joseph Bathanti, his poetry, and Confetti.
My name is Joseph Bathanti, and I am an English teacher here at Mitchell Community College, and I'm also the writer-in-residence, and I teach English.
Okay.
That's what I do to make money.
You mentioned a couple poems about Pittsburgh. Is that where you're from?
Yeah, that's my hometown, and I lived there for the first 23 years of my life. And then I came south to be a VISTA volunteer and really taught in North Carolina's prison system. At Huntersville Prison, which is really just right down the road from here, and Camp Green, which is also in Mecklenburg County, and Mount Pleasant, which is in Cabarrus County. And that's how I met my wife. She was assigned to the same project as I, and we fell in love.
So what did you teach in prison?
Very basic things. There's so many people in prison who have just had terrible experiences with the educational system for a number of reasons. So very basic things like teaching guys to read. I taught creative writing in prison. We taught GED, AB. We did a number of developmental things to just fill in gaps that the guys had. We worked with substance abuse. We took guys to funerals if someone in their family died. We hustled jobs for them if they were on the verge of getting out. All sorts of little odds and ends that one can't really imagine needing, but guys in prison have so little control over their lives that as a result they need a lot of help. So we did a lot of that.
Have you had any contact with any people you may have helped when you were doing this?
When I lived in Charlotte, and I lived in Charlotte for 9 years, I would run regularly into fellows who had gotten out of the system. But I don't keep any habitual contact in terms of writing to them, etc. Although I've been in North Carolina for about 17 and a half years, and I've maintained some involvement with the prison system in various levels, but I've continued to stay involved. I'm involved with the program through the North Carolina Writers Network, which places inmate writers with what we're calling professional writers, and I've been directing that program for maybe 2 or 3, actually it's probably more like 5 years.
Changing direction here, when did you decide that you wanted to write?
I decided I wanted to write when I was I consciously decided I wanted to write when I was probably about 16, junior or senior in high school, but I believe that probably on a less conscious basis I decided I wanted to do that when I was really just a little kid.
Was it the influence of the one aunt specifically? Or?
No, not really. I don't think it was. I was always very much influenced by story and narrative, and I think also a little bit of it, I don't want to generalize, but maybe in my case was egotistical, wanting to be heard, and also thinking that I had something to say. And I think being puzzled by the whole experience of being alive and trying to make sense of it by getting something down. And I've always been a collector, I think. So I think writing is a way for me to collect my life in front of me, certain experiences, and to just declare that not only that I was here, but that all the people that have orbited my life and certain experiences also really happened. So it's a way of documenting things. Why I have that need, I'm not entirely sure, but I decidedly have it.
So in 50 years, if someone were asked who is Joseph Bathanti and we would find your books, would that be accurate collection as far as an autobiography, as far as events and family and...
Yeah, I mean, I think in some senses it would be. It would certainly read as a kind of genealogy with myself as the, if you will, central figure, or at least my consciousness as the central consciousness as the persona. But I think that I will go on to continue to write about my family and the experiences that were central to my childhood. And it worries me sometimes because I feel like I'm continuing to do a lot of similar things, but I think it would be better to continue to do a lot of similar things than not to do anything at all. But I'm very interested in other kinds of expression. For instance, I've written a book called Anson County, which is totally about living way out in the hinterlands of Southern culture in all respects, in which I do not figure terribly prominently into those poems. But I'm not done by a site dealing with what has been immediate to my life in Pittsburgh and Catholicism and the Italian culture, although I envision myself as being, maybe in 50 years, as being hopelessly boring, you know, simply because people will run when I come because they don't want to hear about wicked nuns anymore. Although it does worry me, I would like to write something. When I look at the things that I've written about nuns, I think, well, goodness gracious, this is bad. This is the work of a sexist, a misogynist, a number of other things, none of which I consider myself. But every time I sit down to write a, if you will, positive poem about nuns, it always turns into its nightmare opposite. In other words, I'm trying to find something good to say, and it keeps escaping me. Actually, Daria started out as kind of a poem of admiration, and I hope it is still one, but it also paints Sister Daria as kind of a tough customer. This is called Daria. It's about a nun. And Daria was a martyr, a Christian woman who refused to give in and was toasted to death. It was always from the same daydream of the schoolhouse falling from the weight of flame that I was yanked to my feet by a sideburn, by a one-armed nun who had where there should have been a shoulder a black shelf to which was pinned a gold band wedding her to the Son of Man. If I caught her eye, she'd bat me over, and any boy who laughed, boxing our ears with stump and fist, pinning a whole choir against the board, croaking out the Sanctus as she finished us off with sucker punches. The girl, she simply mortified. She claimed she knew what we were thinking. It was then, with ardor, that we thought of flesh, the pictures we'd ripped from the barber's washroom, even the half-robed and pilloried martyrs occasioned our pent blood to rise, the ubiquitous plush of the virgin's shoulder going down in the snarl of wild dogs. But there was little heart to our lust, only the confusion of not knowing how long we'd have in our bodies. The year she taught us the nouns semen and ovum, I fought an older boy in a foundry lot who accused my parents of using their bodies to have me. The first time I'd ever used my fist on a face. It was Sister Daria who with tweezers picked the slag chips out of my hand and let me cuss when she rubbed it with alcohol. "This is nothing," she said, then emptied the entire bottle. When the school burnt, perhaps because of that one unsnuffed butt left in the condemned lyceum, we knew purgatory had all along resided where we'd been sitting in fear of immolation. Throwing third graders to the firemen below, Sister Daria died in a window. The day of her requiem, I, in cassock and surplice, swept wedding rice from the church steps. Even then I thought of things I shouldn't. The bride and groom, the bedroom door closing. Just yesterday, as a matter of fact, I wrote the first line of what I hope will be an essay discussing the poems I've written about nuns, and the first sentence is, and I'm paraphrasing myself, "When I read what I've written about nuns, I'm worried," or something like that.
I guess a few questions about the process as far as how you write and how you go about it. Is it something that just strikes you on the spur of the moment, or is it more, I should write a poem about my wife, or how is that?
It usually begins with a kind of prompting image. Now that might be something I see, something I hear, something I smell, etc. And it's very small and self-contained at that point. And some of those things sort of, if you will, fall away, but others, like Velcro, if you will, stick to you, and they stick to you long enough. If they stick to you long enough, then you end up, or at least I do, writing a poem about them. One cannot write about everything one wants to write about, so it's obviously things that have some, I hesitate to say mystical, but they have some power in that they nag me long enough that I write about them. For instance, I just happened to think the other night about the fact that my mother's best friend got married when she was 47, and my mother was the matron of honor. And I guess my mother was roughly 47, roughly 50, and they had, this friend of hers had this wild, really wild Polish wedding. You know, it was just, it had all the wonderful sort of contrasts and poignance that one wants a poem to have. So that image just popped into my head for no good reason, and that's, I'm going to write a poem about it. You know I'll write a poem about that just because it's too good. But why didn't I think of that when I'm sitting around thinking, oh, I'm having a dry spell, I wish I could write a poem? I don't instantly think of what I want to think about. So they sort of come willy-nilly, if you will. But I always have some project that I'm messing around with. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's in terms of process, I see it as a real blue-collar process, taking, I don't know, pages and pages of notes, and then deciding what's good, what's not good, and then going from there. I sort of work on like 400 pieces of paper that I keep transferring here and here and here and here and back and forth. It's terribly maddening, disorganized, and wild, but it's the way I do it, so I don't really fight it anymore.
So maybe instead of a writer, you're a rewriter?
I'm really copycatting something that somebody else said, but a poet that I know said that he does not write poems, he rewrites poems, that there are no writers, they're just rewriters. And to a degree, I think that's true. I mean, the first draft, you sort of maybe chunk out willy-nilly, and then you go through the process of refining it. So I think everybody rewrites. That's something students to a degree, not just creative writers, but students that take just regular composition classes, it's very difficult for them to realize, I think, how much rewrite goes into a final product. They have the mistaken notion that writers are just these people who are supremely gifted that just sit down and sort of whip out this perfectly coiffed manuscript and boom. So they hesitate to work as hard as they need to work on it just because they think they're not talented, when really what it is, they just aren't engaging the process the way they need to.
After maybe a poem is published and you read it, do you question your choice of words, or your question anything about it?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, there's some that I like, just the way they are, but frequently I see them and think, this wasn't so good. And even sometimes reading, when I read poems, like now, for instance, I'll even change a word or switch a word or skip a preposition or something like that. So I'm not, the problem with, I always think of Thomas Wolfe's novel that Max Perkins finally had to take away from him because he kept rewriting it. So sometimes I do want to get him out of my way so I can move on to something else.
I guess back to the previous thought as far as rewriting. Any of these poems that we've just heard that you didn't have to rewrite as much as others?
Gee whiz.
That was kind of more, here it is.
Yeah, every now and then that'll happen, which is wonderful. It seemed to me that it used to happen more when I first started writing, that I didn't do as much rewriting and that they were just wonderful right off the bat. But that might mean, of course, that I was careless then and didn't take the time, or wasn't quite as neurotic, maybe. It's hard to say. But I'm trying to think of the ones that I read. It seems that they all took some puttering and tinkering and what, I'm fairly busy with my job, so therefore I don't get large chunks of time to sit down and really work on them. So I have to work in fits and starts, and I think as a result things take longer to be completed because I have to get back into the head where I was, etc. So none of these came too terribly, right out of there.
Certainly your family is an inspiration, and places and possibly events. What else?
Goodness. Family, places, events, landscape. Prison. Prison has been very influential in my life. It really has. I'm trying to polish up a book of short stories that focus on prison life. So prison has been, just because it was such an extreme thing. That's the other thing. Young writers look for things to write about, and they say, well, I haven't done anything. I haven't been to war. I haven't been to the moon. I haven't been a deep sea diver. But it was natural for me to really want to write about prison because I had this very extreme experience. I was on the yard every day for 4 years. So I had something to write about. So I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in the whole notion of confinement. I'm interested in the symbolic aspects of imprisonment and all the socioeconomic things that circulate, or rather orbit, that topic. But I think family and religion is very interesting to me in all of its glory and destruction. So I guess those things. The South is very interesting to me as a place to write about. I'm very intoxicated by its ledger domain in all its glory and destructiveness also.
Are there any new veins of interest?
I'm working on a novel, which is I guess I've always been interested in that, but I'm trying to write a little more prose, and in terms of subject matter, I've had this crazy notion that I want to learn to speak Italian fluently and then translate obscure Italian poets. I mean, that's a new thing, but not really. I mean, I've got so much work that I've already started and I have to complete, and I'm really bad about having 400 things going at one time. So I'm trying to be a little more disciplined, because it really wreaks havoc sometimes in my life, because I feel like I have all these unburied bodies laying around that I have to take care of. So I'm trying to get this sort of book of short stories polished to a point where I can maybe begin sending it out. And I'm trying to lay off poetry only because that's my vice, if you will. You know, I'll be involved in something else, and then I'll start writing a poem just because it's more fun. I mean, it's way more fun for me than writing prose. Writing prose or writing fiction is very hard for me. Writing nonfiction, I'm very interested in creative, what they're calling creative nonfiction. I think it's probably what was called in the 60s a new journalism, but I'm very interested in that. That's fun, and I feel like that's kind of easy. So really, I'm just trying to discipline myself into getting these prose projects completed, just to see if I can, you know, just to see if I can do it. I mean, I'm not sure they're any good. I mean, I have sort of reasonable certainty when I write a poem that it's at least okay. I don't have any sense of that when I write prose, or at least when I write fiction. So that's the new vein, I guess.
Are there any writers you look to for inspiration?
Dead ones or living ones?
Either. Good friends or...
Well, you know, it's funny that the writers that I look to, the writers that I know who are friends of mine, while I revere their writing, I look to them more in terms of inspiration for just who they are. And I'm thinking, just because I have this review in front of me that I recently wrote about Ron Bay's big new selected poems that's just come out. Ron is a person who's been particularly influential, I think, simply because he's been so generous. And he's a sustaining friend. And there's also a woman named Catherine Stripling Beyer who lives in the western part of the state, who was very, very kind to me when I first came to North Carolina. So that I think of them with, you know, great reverence, because they were terribly generous. And I admire a Greensboro writer, Michael Parker, very much in his work. He just has a relatively brand new book called Hello Down There. And just, you know, all of my writer pals are just, you know, just really fine people. In terms of writing that I return to again and again to maybe sustain my own writing, I think Robert Lowell is a poet that whose work I can use, and Richard Hugo is a poet that I admire a lot, and Flannery O'Connor is the short fiction writer I think that I admire more than anyone for just a number of reasons. And I guess I'm looking over there at my bookshelf to prompt myself, but I think, you know, I think there's a guy named Jim Harrison who lives up in Michigan that I love his work, and I just have been reading Cormac McCarthy, and I think Faulkner's a genius, and I think that, I know I'm not supposed to like Hemingway, but I do.
Do you have like a schedule, like, I think there's one writer in Greensboro who does like heavy reading 5 to 7 a.m. and then lighter reading after that. And do you have like a set schedule?
Wow, I wonder if that writer has a job and a family. That would be. Anyhow, I don't. I think I did at one time. My schedule revolves really around two things, and the number one thing is my family, of course, and then I guess the number two thing is my job. We have two children, so when my second son came along, who's a year and a half old, things got much more complicated. Just having another baby in the house. So I'm kind of a willy-nilly kind of guy when it comes to doing my writing. I do it like whenever I can. For instance, when I get home today, I'm going to attempt to shut myself up in the bedroom with a pot of tea and write a little bit. But that, that might not work because somebody might want me to do something, and I feel like I need to do it if that's the case. And I mean essentially the children might want me to do something. So I don't. I did have a schedule where I'd write in the morning all the time. That was like what I did, but there's so much happening now that I don't. So it's just weird times which plays havoc, but I'm trying not to pout and be unreasonable about that and just figure that won't go on forever. The name of the poem is Aunt Nina in Midair. Aunt Nina, in hot pink sweats, meets us at the door, holding out her casted wrists, cracked from her most recent fall. Parkinson's has strung her like a puppet, spooking the staggers her smiling gander. At her back and jamming the sill is her black nurse, Gloria, who disappears once her charge is commended to our arms. We shuffle Aunt Nina to the couch and sit at her feet the way we used to as kids, innocent of the souls of the faithfully departed. When she'd shake out the fable of the child-eating hollow bridge monster Spalluccio that sent us tearing to hide in her fur coats, she would laugh. She had the hollow cheeks and ascetic mien, the blue mane of a Grimm's queen, and spray us with atomized Chanel. Our children are indifferent. Lost in their own narratives, they color and read, their memories rearranging the texts of our lives. Their maiden aunt pets them, murmurs benediction, passing over them the wand of fiction, that all will be well if we thank God even for malediction. She looks herself a child, tiny, lower lip pouting, arrowroot skin hair fretted from her forehead with rhinestone barrettes. On the wall above her head is a sign gravure of John the 23rd, fat and aquiline in his satin skull cap. His spavined script tracks ex-cathedraly over the graying paper. I've heard it said all my life she should have married instead of this. I wander to her high-story range of windows beneath which slinks the hill district, still taboo from the King War. Statue of St. Benedict the Moor, black lords over the spate of barred stores hawking the season in glyphic Yiddish. Miles down the river, pale fire leaps from the open hearth, and a bridge seems through the distorting flame to slowly sink into the water. For one vertiginous instant, I know what it's like to be alone in midair, and I can't bear it. Yet there's music coming from my aunt's bedroom, and when I enter it, I find Gloria, oblivious to my presence, playing an adagio from what I couldn't say, on the kind of little keyboard one buys a child for Christmas.
No, I think it's about 12.